came to the New World before Columbus, each one has been explored in great detail in articles and documentaries. But for whatever reason, the exploits of Africans in the New World is seldom mentioned. That changes today. Anyway, popular theories surrounding the possible exploration of Africans to the New World, or as we call the Americas, usually center around the Olmecs or even the ancient Egyptians. The overwhelming majority of scholars today believe that the Olmecs were indigenous people in the Americas a long time ago. But some African-centered scholars like Ivan van Cernema assert that the Olmecs were Africans. Some scholars from the African diaspora and outside even believe the ancient Egyptians may have journeyed to the New World and, according to some, left evidence of this. But today, we're not even going to get into that, because believe it or not, we have far better evidence for the African presence in the discovery of the New World. Africans, contrary to popular belief, played a very intriguing role when it came to the discovery and colonization of the Americas, not just as enslaved people, but as explorers. Ignoring all the major theories of Africans coming to the Americas before Columbus, we're going to focus on the tangible evidence. According to the evidence that we have, there are many Africans who are present in the New World, but according to the tangible evidence, there are 3 official native-born Africans who are recorded by name. These 3 native-born Africans are significant for many reasons and should be acknowledged. The social status of these 3 African men are very interesting, to say the least. One was an enslaved African, the other was a soldier, and the last one was a king from an African empire. 2 of these Africans came after Columbus, and one of them came before. In fact, a whole century before. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, we're going to hear about Pedro Alonso Nino. No. Pedro Alonso Nino is disqualified from this list because he is not a native-born African. Now, I know some of you may say, how can you disqualify a guy who literally navigated Columbus on his journey to the New World? I know, Pedro and his brothers won't be on this list simply because they weren't born in an African nation. Some of you might have heard of these Africans before, but for one of them, I'm going to present some new information from a different perspective that isn't actually highlighted. So just bear with me. The first African that we'll be discussing today goes by the Spanish name Estevanico, or Esteban. Now, Esteban was one of the first native Africans to reach the present-day continental United States. The story of Estevanico is incredible. It's actually one of the most interesting stories coming from this period in history, hands down. Estevanico was sold into slavery in 1522 in a Portuguese-controlled town in Morocco. The Portuguese described him often as a Moor. In reality, Estevanico in all likelihood came from the Haratine ethnic group. The Haratine have an extensive history in Morocco and were at one point the backbone of Moroccan society. The Haratine were a mixture of different African ethnic groups from further south who were enslaved. Many of them intermarried and mixed with Sanhaja Berber populations, creating a new ethnic group known as a Haratine today. Many Haratine actually participated in the Moorish invasion of Spain, so the Portuguese were well aware of who Estevanico was and his history. Estevanico was taken to Florida to help colonize Florida and the Gulf Coast. This is where the story of Estevanico gets really interesting. After numerous failed efforts to locate villages with gold near present-day Tampa Bay and numerous attacks by Native Americans, the Spanish party that Estevanico accompanied started dying like dogs. So the diminishing party slaughtered their horses, melted down metals, and made 5 boats in an attempt to sail across the Gulf of Mexico to reach the main Spanish settlement. This desperate attempt also failed because, of course, the boats they made wrecked off the coast of Texas and 80 men literally starved to death. At times, the survivors were enslaved by Native American populations. This was a horror story for Estevanico. Eventually, he and other Spaniards survived, spending their time enslaved by Native American tribes for years. In 1534, Estevanico and the other Spanish men escaped into the American interior, pretending to be men of great medicinal knowledge, tricking Native American populations into giving them food, shelter, gifts, and above all else, respect. Estevanico and the other Spanish men had it good for a while. When they decided they wanted to leave, the host village would guide them to the next village. Sometimes there would be as many as 3,000 people following them to the next village. The party traversed the continent as far as western Mexico, where they were eventually found by a slave hunting group of Spaniards. In 1539, Estevanico traveled with a group of Indians in search of the fabled 7 cities of gold. In turn, he encountered the Zuni Indians, and the spectacular story of Estevanico pretty much ends there. Many historians say that the Zuni Indians simply killed Estevanico, but there are some who suggest that he actually faked his death amongst the Zuni so that he could be freed. In the end, the story of Estevanico is worthy of a film at the very least. His story by far is one of the most interesting interactions between an African and Native Americans in history. Next, we have Juan Garrido. Now, some would think that Estevanico was the first African present on the continental United States, but that's actually false. Juan Garrido, an African from Angola, was in Florida as early as 1513 with Ponce de Leon. The story of Juan Garrido is almost the exact opposite of Estevanico. For one, Juan was not a slave, but a man living in Angola. Second, he wasn't taken to Europe, he actually just decided to move there. And finally, he wasn't given the name Juan Garrido by any European. He actually converted to Catholicism and simply decided to change his name on his own free will. In these times, it was extremely rare for any African outside of Africa to carry all of those characteristics simultaneously. Even Moorish soldiers had some servitude status under their leader. Ironically, his life before conversion is a bit more intriguing. Anyway, Juan moved to Portugal as a young man and joined a Spanish expedition and arrived in Santo Domingo around 1502. Juan was one of numerous Africans who had joined expeditions from Seville to the Americas, but what continues to make Juan unique was that he was a willing participant in totality. Juan's story goes a little like this. By 1519, Juan participated in the expedition led by Hernan Cortez to invade Mexico, where they laid siege to the Aztec Empire. In 1520, he built a chapel to commemorate the many Spanish killed in battle that year by the Aztec. Juan Garrido settled down later in Mexico City, where he and his wife had 3 children. Juan is special in the African world because of his significance and influence on the New World. Not only did he help the Spanish colonize the Americas, but he is credited with the first harvesting of wheat in Mexico. The guy was a successful warrior and a pioneering agriculturalist. Juan is unique because out of all the Africans present during the Spanish conquest of America, he is literally mentioned by name. Perhaps we remember Juan because he made it very clear that he is not to be forgotten or dismissed. We have direct first-hand proof of his existence and his participation in New World events. In 1538, Garrido wrote a letter providing testimony on his 30 years of service as a conquistador. I, Juan Garrido, black in color, resident of this city, appear before your mercy and state that I am in need of providing evidence to the perpetuity of the king, a report on how I serve your majesty in the conquest and pacification of this new Spain, from the time when the Marquez entered it, and in his company I was present at all the invasions and conquests and pacifications which were carried out, always with the said Marquez, all of which I did at my own expense, without being given either salary or allotment of natives or anything else. As I am married and a resident of this city, where I have always lived, and also as I went with the Marquez to discover the islands which are in that part of the Southern Sea, where there was much hunger and privation, and also as I went to discover and pacify the islands of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and also as I went on pacification and conquest of the island of Cuba with the Diego Velazquez. In all these ways, for 30 years have I served and continue to serve your majesty. For these reasons stated above do I petition your mercy. And also, because I was the first to have the inspiration to sow maize here in New Spain and to see if it took. I did this and experimented at my own expense. The legacy of Juan Garrido is nothing short of exceptional, being not only a conquistador, one of the first Africans in the New World, but also being a pioneer in introducing wheat in that part of Mexico. I mean, what more is there really to say? He was a natural explorer, traveler, and pioneer. And finally, we have the first official documented African explorer to the New World. His name, Mansa Abu Bakari II, an African king. Now, many of you have probably never even heard of this king of Mali, and some of you may not have even heard of the Mali Empire of West Africa. But Abu Bakari II was the king of Mali around 1310. Mansa Abu Bakari II is the greatest of all the African explorers, simply because of his determination to explore. He was so convinced that there was land across the Atlantic that he literally abdicated his throne to go find it. Some of you may think that this is just a legend or some myth, but his journey across the Atlantic Ocean is actually well documented. In fact, the most popular king in all of West African history would not be on the throne as soon as he was if it weren't for him. Mansa Musa himself, the wealthiest king in human history, tells the story of Mansa Abu Bakari II. We have a direct quote from Mansa Musa himself explaining the journey of Abu Bakari. Mansa Musa came to the throne through a practice of appointing a deputy when a king goes on his pilgrimage to Mecca or some other endeavor, and later naming that deputy as heir. According to primary sources, Mansa Musa was appointed deputy of Abu Bakari II, the king before him, who had reportedly embarked on an expedition to explore the limits of the Atlantic Ocean and never returned. The Arab-Egyptian scholar Al-Umari quotes Mansa Musa as follows: "The ruler who preceded me did not believe that it was impossible to reach the extremity of the ocean that encircles the earth. He wanted to reach that end and was determined to pursue his plan. So he equipped 200 boats full of men and many others full of gold, water, and provisions, sufficient for several years. He ordered the captain not to return until they had reached the other end of the ocean, or until he had exhausted the provisions and water. So they set out on their journey. They were absent for a long period, and at last just one boat returned. When questioned, the captain replied, 'O Prince, we navigated for a long period until we saw in the midst of the ocean a great river, which was flowing massively. My boat was the last one. Others were ahead of me, and they were drowned in the great whirlpool and never came out again. I sailed back to escape this current.' But the Sultan would not believe him. He ordered 2,000 boats to be equipped for him and his men, and 1,000 more for water and provisions. Then he conferred the regency on me for the term of his absence, and departed with his men, never to return, nor give a sign of life." So basically, we have tangible proof that in 1311, Mansa Abu Bakari II traveled to the New World a whole century before Christopher Columbus. Ironically enough, Columbus himself and some Spanish royalty seem to have known already that West Africans sailed the Atlantic as well. According to the abstract of Columbus's log made by Bartholomew de las Casas, the purpose of Columbus's third voyage was actually to test both the claims of King John II of Portugal that, and I quote, "canoes had been found which set out from the coasts of Guinea and sailed to the west with merchandise," as well as the claims of the native inhabitants of the Caribbean island of Hispaniola that, and I quote, "from the south and the southeast had come black people whose spears were made of a metal called ganin." There are even documented claims from Spaniards in the New World encountering Africans who were having incessant war with Native Americans. Peter Martyr himself, an Italian historian at the service of Spain during the Age of Exploration, said that Negroes had been shipwrecked in the New World and had taken refuge in the mountains. He even called them Ethiopian pirates, the term Ethiopian at that time being a general title for black Africans. Now, of course, the obvious question is, what happened to Abu Bakari II and his journey to the New World? If we're to be genuine scholars, we must admit that the legacy of Abu Bakari II's journey to the New World was a total failure, if not disaster, because it seems clear from African and European sources, if we combine them together, that Mansa Abu Bakari II indeed made it to the New World, but became shipwrecked, and his men were left in a constant state of survival against numerous Native American ethnic groups. In all honesty, that seems to be the most likely scenario, a total disaster. But the legacy of Mansa Abu Bakari does not leave us without more fantastic splendor and mystery. The most interesting thing about the journey of Abu Bakari is not necessarily that he made it to the New World before Columbus, but that there is supposed archaeological evidence of Mandinka presence in the New World, called the Brazil statuette. The Brazil statuette is by far the most mysterious and the most controversial piece of potential evidence we have of Abu Bakari's journey. Some may even say it doesn't even exist, but apparently this tablet was found near a river in Brazil, and it seems to present a unique message. No one has thoroughly given an answer as to what this statuette really is and who made it. In fact, there seems to be very little literature concerning it. Some suggest that it clearly depicts an African soldier. Interestingly enough, the Mandinka at that time indeed wore a military uniform very similar to what's depicted on the statuette. The figure, like the soldiers from Mali, wore a sleeveless tunic, skullcap, and breeches reaching down to the knees. Even though the military uniform of the Mali Empire and the Mandinka fits the statuette nicely, there doesn't seem to be any connection with the writing on the tablet with the Mali Empire. The closest theory we have is this. West Africans have an extensive history of using writing not for the masses, but for an elite group of people. Writing in West Africa was for the priesthood for the most part. Two examples we have is the Sibiti script of Nigeria and the script of the Kumba priesthood of the Songhai people. Now, it's common knowledge that those from the Mali and Songhai empires were using Ajami script for public consumption, but we know there was also a hidden script for an elite group of people, usually the priesthood, amongst the Songhai. Now, if the Songhai Empire had this secret script, then in order for this Brazil statuette to fit in the narrative of Abu Bakari's journey, we are left with no option but to assume that the Mandinka had a secret script as well. And what better place to use it than in a foreign land to communicate with your people only? That's the best theory we got. So essentially, other than the clothing of the Brazil statuette that nicely fits the military uniform of the Mali Empire, we really don't have much more evidence connecting this statuette and the legacy of Abu Bakari. Whether the Brazil statuette and its connection to Mali is true or not, or if it even exists, it doesn't matter. The discussion of Abu Bakari's journey to the New World is by far the most exciting and intriguing legacies of West Africa. Well, I'm all out, guys. It seems clear that black Africans, no matter their title or role, were definitely connected with the exploration and even the founding of colonies in the New World. They played an indispensable and at times an inconspicuous role in one of the greatest events in human history.
Let's go over a few definitions to prepare us for this presentation. First thing I want to discuss is Pan-Africanism. This global movement seeks to build and strengthen solidarity amongst indigenous peoples of Africa and their diasporas. While its intentions are unifying, Pan-Africanism sometimes paints all things African with a broad stroke, overshadowing the diverse contributions of cultures to humanity. Afrocentrism. Afrocentrism is a worldview that centers on the history and achievements of African descendant peoples, often in response to Eurocentric narratives. While it aims to reclaim pride in African heritage, it can sometimes favor African perspectives over those of non-African civilizations. With Eurocentric views and Eurocentrism, the science behind it, they're scientists in fields of anthropology and archaeology and so forth. Afrocentrism made sense. It was needed to counter the racist views that was putting out or being put out on people of African descent. Eurocentrism. This perspective places Western culture at the center of world history, often portraying it as superior to all others. Eurocentrism serves as the foundation for ideas like white supremacy and privileged behavior. Ethnocentrism is the belief that one's own group, ethnicity, or culture is inherently superior. This attitude spans across multiple ethnic groups and manifests in behaviors like judging others, judging traditional foods, cultural attire, and language abilities. The Aboriginal movement. This ideology asserts that American Negroes are the original inhabitants of the Americas. Proponents often reference the 1828 Oxford Dictionary, which describes American Indians as copper-colored, and use visual comparisons to validate their claims. They are generally not involved in communities. Their communities are usually found online. We usually mention to people involved in Aboriginal movements to get involved with the communities. Talk to the tribes that exist in these states. Many of them choose not to. Hebrew Israelites. This belief system ties the 12 tribes of Israel to the American Indian tribes of African descent, while casting others as transgressors or adversaries of divine law. Hebrew Israelites say the tribes of Israel are the American Indian tribes. For example, the American Negro is supposed to be Judah or Yehuda. The Jamaicans are Benjamin or Benjamin. Mexicans are Issachar. That's what they teach. I don't think all Hebrew Israelites teach this, but some do. And I think it's becoming popular and catching on. So more are starting to gravitate towards that. Even people who don't claim to be Hebrew Israelites are now starting to gravitate towards this information because, again, just like with the Aboriginal movement, it's confusing. And people researching, they run across this information and it sounds like it's real, it sounds valid, but once you start talking to the communities, everything has to go back to the communities. The communities and the tribes in these communities, they're going to let you know if they are Moorish, if they are Hebrew, if there are any of these things that people claim. You always have to go back to the community, validate that. The oral history is still there. Go to the community. The Moorish Science Temple of America, founded by Noble Drew Ali in the early 20th century. This organization teaches that African Americans are descendants of the Moabites, identifying as Moorish by nationality and Islamic by faith. Splinter Moorish groups. Breaking away from the original Moorish Science Temple, these groups often adopt ideologies akin to sovereign citizens. Many believe they are the true American Indians, calling America a Mexim. Again, the communities do not support this. If you look at any congressional records, colonial records, if you search the archives, if you talk to the elders in these communities, they're not going to support this. Xenocentrism. It is the belief that another culture is superior to one's own. This can manifest as cultural appropriation, such as adopting aspects of another culture without genuine understanding. This can also manifest into cultural appropriation. Because you don't like your own culture, now you're taking someone else's and trying to make it yours without actually talking with the community, getting involved and learning, and maybe becoming adopted or just working with the community. Xenophobia. Ethnocentrism can breed fear or hostility towards other cultures, known as xenophobia. This prejudice often stems from a lack of understanding or appreciation for cultural differences. Oikophobia. A close relative to xenophobia, oikophobia describes the tendency to disdain one's own cultural traditions, customs, and institutions. Basically, you hate yourself and you have no self-love, which is why you can't seem to show love to others. And when you go through the motions, it seems as you're being fake because deep down, you don't really mean it. Narcissism. Narcissism is a self-centered personality disorder. It is a mental health condition in which people have an unreasonably high sense of their own importance. They need and seek too much attention and want people to admire them. People with this disorder, they may lack the ability to understand or care about the feelings of others. Cultural pluralism. At the heart of my perspective lies cultural pluralism, the belief in valuing, respecting, and preserving the diversity of cultures within a society. A cultural pluralist promotes mutual understanding and harmony without imposing the dominance of one culture over another. Now, I truly love my culture. I love my history. I love my ancestors. I love my people. But I'm not going to put that over other cultures to belittle or make others look less than just because I love my own culture. So I'm more of a cultural pluralist. I love cultures coming together because collectively, that's what we're going to have to do in order to survive according to the Hopi prophecies, the Sioux Nation prophecies, the Haudenosaunee prophecies, and on. They sound a little different when you hear each speak about the prophecies. They may sound a little differently, but they're saying the same thing. And what they're saying is, mankind is like a virus, and Mother Earth, we're making her sick. And when your body is sick, it raises its temperature to kill the germs or the virus or the bacteria. Mother Earth may raise her temperature to get rid of the virus that's harming her. This reset has happened before a few times, and we're looking at another because mankind can't get their act together. Climate change is real. The ice is melting. The water is rising. It's so many different things happening. So to truly embrace cultural pluralism, we must rely on evidence and facts, rejecting narratives that omit key details or distort the truth. Intellectual honesty requires us to not only stand firmly on verifiable sources, but also to admit when we are wrong. By doing so, we forever stand on truth. We foster genuine understanding and celebrate the richness of human diversity. I would like to describe myself as a cultural pluralist, like I said a little earlier, because who was on first or who was on second is not of great importance when compared to other things happening in the world, such as climate change, protecting the water, land rights, paving the way for the next 7 generations. So they're not in the same situation we find ourselves in today. What gives this importance is the hate that one demographic faces when claiming the heritage, which is wrong. So a lot of what you see is the response to other demographics' views. Very similar to Afrocentrism's relevance and existence in response to Eurocentrism. Also, we're all related. We may not be first or second or third cousins, but related nevertheless. Many wisdom keepers of different cultures from around the world spoke of unity, not individualism. Having respect for other cultures is also important, respecting other viewpoints and building on what each culture has in common, instead of focusing on the things that are divisive. Division is the easy road to travel, which most people choose instead of putting in the work with relationship building, which is what will be required of us for our survival. Those who fail to see or hear will probably be amongst the first to go. Like I said a little bit earlier, the Hopi, Lakota, the Haudenosaunee, and others, that's just to name a few. They speak about this in the prophecy, so please don't think this is something I'm creating or making up out of the ninth dimension of my imagination. I'm going to spend a little time here speaking about the urgency of unity, reclaiming indigenous identity, preserving oral histories, advocating for environmental and social change, and the complexity of history and identity. I will speak about Abu Bakari II, as well as the Mesoamerican shamanic transformation, and more as I move through this conversation presentation. Indigenous identity and international recognition. The Scurry-Wokan have called these lands of the southeastern North Carolina home since time immemorial. Their lineage ties them to the original inhabitants of this region. Despite colonial systems seeking to erase them, they have maintained their sovereignty and identity, achieving recognition on the international stage through agreements and treaties via FANA, the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas, the Kaffir Band of Scurry-Wokan Indians, and other FANA member nations have established international recognition connecting with the global international community. We don't speak down on tribal nations who pursue state and federal recognition. However, we do discuss their limitations, the strings attached to these recognition statuses, the division and harm it has caused, and how blood quantum is designed to work against us and genocide us out of existence. It is designed to work against indigenous peoples instead of working for them. International recognition affirms the sovereignty of indigenous peoples on their terms. This sovereignty is rooted in pre-United States treaties, historical agreements, and cultural continuity, standing as a testament to their enduring resilience and connection to their ancestral lands. Oral histories, the foundation of indigenous knowledge. Oral histories are the heartbeat of indigenous cultures. They carry the wisdom, experiences, and truths of generations, preserved through storytelling, dances, songs, and drumming. However, in academic and colonial context, oral traditions are often dismissed as hearsay and unreliable or unscientific. This bias devalues indigenous knowledge systems while perpetuating the supremacy of written records from European sources and perspectives, often created by outsiders with limited understanding of the cultures they are documenting. The oral histories of the Scurry-Wokan people align with the historical accounts of early explorers such as Giovanni de Verrazano, who encountered the Cape Fear Indians. Verrazano's description of the language, customs, and ways of life corroborate the Scurry-Wokan oral traditions. This demonstrates the value of oral histories as authentic sources of history, equal to or even surpassing the written accounts of European explorers like John Lawson, whose writings contain inaccuracies when compared to indigenous narratives. Yes, he has captured a lot of great information, but still with inaccuracies, with errors. The Sandhill Band of Cherokee and Lenape Indians also have oral histories, as well as the other fauna member nations, with their oral histories that could connect the dots of debated topics otherwise full of assumptions by European scholars. Similarly, the oral traditions of other indigenous and African peoples offer insights into the transatlantic connections predating European colonization. The Zulu elder and wisdom keeper, Credo Mutwa, spoke of a deep spiritual connection between African and indigenous peoples of the Polynesian areas, as he told the stories of Maui, Africa, and the necklace, which stands as evidence. And even when there's no European sources to write about this, Aunt Po, who is the Hawaiian elder, and Credo Mutwa, in this case, are true sources because of their historical oral histories, with the evidence of a necklace to corroborate their stories. His teachings emphasize that humanity's survival depends on reuniting these long separated kin and remembering the ancient alliances forged across vast oceans. Sheikh Anta Diop is another African scholar speaking about the relationships and connections between Africa and America. Diop worked to unskew European-centric views and cultivate Afrocentrism. He opened the first radiocarbon dating laboratory in Africa to study historical documents from ancient Egypt, gathering evidence that the pharaonic civilization was in fact African. One such story involves Auntie Po. Again, remember, the Hawaiian elder and leader, who preserved the story about a necklace left by Maui, the legendary Polynesian navigator. According to the story, this necklace was gifted to African mariners who had traveled across the Indian and Pacific Oceans before continuing their voyages to the Americas. This oral tradition mirrors African accounts of ancient maritime exploration, adding layers of continuity and connectivity between these two oceanic peoples. African oral histories, including those from the Soninke and Bambara of the Mali Empire, also speak of skilled navigators who ventured across the Atlantic using the Canary Current and the North Equatorial Current. These currents used centuries later by European sailors such as Columbus facilitated travel between Africa and the Americas. African knowledge of these currents is further substantiated by accounts of an African crew member on Columbus's voyage who had prior knowledge of the Atlantic and its currents. If Europeans could use these natural pathways to reach the Americas, it's only logical and common sense that African mariners equipped with comparable expertise achieved similar feats long before European contact. There's a reason historians today want to keep the stories of Africans and indigenous Americans before the time of Columbus swept under the rug. This requires common sense thinking and studying the patterns of European imperialism and colonialism. They will always write themselves into the story as being at the top of the ladder while putting others on the bottom step, and some not even on the ladder at all. This is a pattern common to how they write about indigenous cultures worldwide. The consequences of miseducation. Miseducation is not an abstract issue. It has real and damaging consequences. It perpetuates white supremacy by framing European colonization as a civilizing force, while erasing the achievements and wisdom of African and indigenous Americans and other non-European cultures worldwide. It creates divisions within communities, pitting African, indigenous, and mixed heritage peoples against one another, and it distorts the shared histories that connect all humanity, allowing false narratives to dominate public consciousness. The Great Law of Peace offers guidance here, reminding us that the welfare of the people is the highest law. We must put aside differences and work for the good of all. By embracing this teaching, we can move beyond divisive ideologies and work towards understanding and unity. If you are not about unity, then what are you about? Pause for a minute and think about this question before you move on. Environmental and social change, the urgency of action. Amid debates over identity and history, humanity faces an existential threat: climate change, rising temperatures, pollution, and resource exploitation endanger not only the environment but also the survival of the future generations. These challenges demand collective action from all of us, yet humanity remains distracted by divisions: red against black, black against white, indigenous against African. Such divisions undermine efforts to protect Earth Mother and ensure a sustainable future. It's like shooting yourself in the right foot to spite the left foot, not knowing that by doing this, you are crippling yourself. If humanity could put aside religious and political differences, as well as understand that race was created to undermine humanity, we will be able to achieve amazing things. So, a call to unity and respect. True leadership is rooted in humility, historical accuracy, and service to the community. It rejects the manipulation of narratives and the exclusion of others. The Kafir Band of Skori-Wokan Indians exemplifies this leadership, standing in truth despite opposition and working tirelessly for the welfare of their people and building bridges with those interested in reciprocating. This is a call to action for indigenous communities, for humanity, and for the earth itself. We must honor our ancestors by preserving their stories, protecting their lands, and advocating for future generations. We must reject false narratives, challenge prejudices, and embrace the shared histories that connect us all. The fight for clean water, sustainable practices, and social justice is not a solitary battle. It is a collective effort that requires the wisdom of the past, the strength of the present, and the vision of the future. Together, we can reclaim our histories, heal our divisions, and ensure that the quilt of humanity remains intact as a beautiful patchwork, connecting one stitch at a time. The evolution of humanity and the interconnectedness of peoples in early human migration and global spread of modern humans. Modern humans evolved in Africa approximately 200,000 years ago. A pivotal question in human evolution is how our species populated the rest of the globe. Genetic studies published in Nature conclude that all non-Africans today trace their ancestry to a single population that emerged from Africa between 50,000 to 80,000 years ago. Researchers sequenced the genomes of 787 individuals from diverse indigenous populations such as Basque, African Pygmies, Mayans, Bedouins, Sherpas, and Cree Indians. This data revealed that all non-Africans descend from a single migration wave, despite earlier hypotheses of multiple migrations. However, some findings point to earlier migrations. Evidence includes modern human skeletons in Israel 120,000 and 90,000 years ago, tools in India and Saudi Arabia 100,000 years ago, and teeth in China 80,000 to 120,000 years ago. Furthermore, traces of DNA in Papua New Guinea suggest an earlier migration from Africa over 140,000 years ago. The Khoisan people of southern Africa, representing one of the oldest genetic lineages, began separating from other human groups 200,000 years ago. There's evidence underscores the possibility that Modern human behaviors, such as language, may have evolved earlier than traditionally believed. What about the Soltrian culture and migration to the Americas? The Soltrian culture associated with the Khoisan people forms the foundation of the Soltrian hypothesis. This controversial theory suggests that ancient populations may have crossed the Atlantic from Europe to the Americas during the Ice Age. While some scholars dismiss the hypothesis, others argue for potential links between Africa, Europe, and the Americas through artifacts, oral traditions, and genetic evidence. Multiple types of early humans entered the Americas, including the Anu, Negrito type, Khoisan, Australians, and Proto-Saharans. The Khoisan, once dominant in Africa, dispersed globally, contributing to the genetic and cultural makeup of populations across the Americas. Challenges to historical narratives. Mainstream academics often resist acknowledging pre-Columbian connections between Africa and the Americas, constrained by entrenched biases and disciplinary silos. However, growing interdisciplinary evidence from archaeology, linguistics, and oral tradition challenges these perspectives. This evidence suggests that African and indigenous influences were more intertwined than traditionally acknowledged. The role of climate migration and indigenous DNA. Changing rainfall patterns and ecological shifts created corridors from Africa to Eurasia, facilitating migration. Indigenous DNA plays a vital role in understanding human history, providing insights into global migrations and interactions. While indigenous genomes remain underrepresented in sequencing efforts, new data is reshaping our understanding of genetic diversity and migration patterns. African contributions to the Americas. Here we go. Malian ruler Abu Bakr II, or Abu Bakari, is believed to have led expeditions across the Atlantic in the early 14th century. While these claims are debated, artifacts, oral traditions, linguistic parallels suggest an African presence in the Americas before Columbus. The reluctance to recognize these connections reflect biases within academic and historical narratives. Migration is humanity's oldest tradition. From the first steps out of Africa, humans migrated across the continents, encountering and interbreeding with other hominins such as Neanderthals, Denisovans. Over millennia, listen now, over millennia, these migrations led to the development of distinct languages, cultures, and genetic identities. In regions like Asia, Europe, Australia, and the Americas, humans adapted to local environments, forming new ways of life and new identities deeply tied to their homelands. For example, indigenous peoples of the Americas evolved into distinct groups after arriving on the continent, creating diverse cultures, languages, traditions, and so forth. Bantu DNA markers have been found in cultures across the world, including as far as Polynesia. This is supported by traditional African accounts such as those shared by Credo Mutua and Antipo, which highlight ancient connections across the continents. Unity and the path forward. The diversity of humanity reflects long histories of migration, adaptation, and evolution. Africa, the cradle of humanity, remains the most genetically diverse region on the planet. Yes, colonial systems imposed artificial divisions based on skin color and ancestry, fostering conflict between African, indigenous, and other communities. These divisions persist today, perpetuated by those who benefit from disunity. It is essential to recognize that these divisions are artificial and counter to the natural flow of human history. Unity is vital for progress, and understanding our shared origins can foster harmony. Humanity's survival depends on overcoming divisive narratives, as foretold by the prophecies of many nations. Unity is the key to ensuring the future of our species. Recognizing our common heritage will enable us to grow together and avoid the downfall warned by our ancestors. Our people, the Scurry-Wokan, have inhabited the lands of southeastern North Carolina since time immemorial. We carry within us the spirit and legacy of our ancestors, who were instrumental in shaping this region. Through the sacred bonds of kinship and shared history, we recognize our connections to state tribes with Tuscarora ancestry. However, these connections do not grant the right to appropriate Tuscarora history and culture while simultaneously excluding the Tuscarora people. Some disenfranchised communities feel compelled to resort to exclusionary tactics due to state and tribal complicity. But this is not the way forward. Some have tried to distort historical narratives by imposing claims that disregard the unique identity of our people and the sacrifices of our ancestors. Since our reemergence in 1999, when our family reinserted our people back into the memories of our communities as the Cape Fear Indian tribe of Bladen and Columbus County, under the leadership of Chief Jimmy Webb, we have faced divisiveness, hate, and dealt with the exclusionist mindset that continues 25 years later under our name today, Scurry-Wokan. An example of continued exclusion is when the newly formed Tuscarora group, along with Rep. Ed Goodwin, sent out invitations to different bands for a push to bring the Tuscaroras together. However, we did not receive an invitation. Of utmost importance to us is being rooted in environmental stewardship, mutual respect, love for our families, and love for Sacred Good Creator. We're not interested in being party to this newly formed organization with Mr. Goodwin at the center. However, it is the principle and mutual respect that's in question. True unity cannot be achieved through power imbalances and external control, the state, but through communal dialogue and mutual respect. In the Great Law of Peace, the Six Nations achieved unity and extraordinary accomplishments. These principles remain a guidepost for us today. However, wars, disenfranchisement, indoctrination, and assimilation have disrupted our path, evident in how we treat each other today. The Cape Fear Band of Scurry-Wokan Indians asserts our sovereignty and rejects any attempts to erase us or appropriate our history. We are the descendants of treaty signers, cultivators of this land, and resistors of colonial aggression. Our lineage ties us to the original inhabitants of this region, and we are bound by blood of our ancestors. We will not allow our history to be overshadowed by organizations or individuals who lack a genuine connection to this land and refuse dialogue. The problem of white supremacy and miseducation it perpetuates has long been a tool of white supremacy. Miseducation has long been a tool which thrives on the false narrative that European colonization brought progress and technology to the Americas. This belief frames Europeans as benevolent forces, conveniently ignoring the destruction they cause to indigenous lands, cultures, and people. By dismissing the wisdom of indigenous agricultural practices, sustainable living, and governance, this narrative justifies centuries of violence, exploitation, and environmental degradation. The idea that Europeans improved the Americas ignores the fact that their technologies, divorced from indigenous wisdom, have contributed to climate change, pollution, and the proliferation of genetically modified foods. These changes have caused diseases and environmental crises that were unheard of 500 years ago. Far from being an improvement, European colonization introduced systems that disrupted the harmony indigenous peoples had cultivated for millennia. The response of Pan-Africanism and its shortcomings. In response to white supremacy, Pan-Africanism emerged as a movement to uplift people of African descent and counter Eurocentric narratives. While Pan-Africanism has been a powerful force for resistance, it sometimes overlooks or dismisses the histories of people with blended African indigenous ancestry. In its effort to reclaim African heritage, it risks alienating individuals who identify as indigenous and erasing the interconnectedness of African and indigenous histories. Racism within indigenous communities. Compounding the problem, some indigenous Americans influenced by colonial ideologies view people of African descent through a racist lens. This prejudice alienates those with African heritage and fractures indigenous communities, perpetuating the same systems of division imposed by colonization. Some of our Western native relatives feel like they have the authority to speak on all Eastern woodlands, when in actuality, they do not. They did not experience the beginning of colonialism and settlement and invasion on the Eastern Shore. The Eastern woodlands experienced it differently and is different from the experience of our relatives in the Plains region, with histories that we cannot relate to. However, we are relatives and we have things in common, but we have to respect the differences and not look at the superiority of one group over the other. The rise of Black Aboriginal narratives. Adding another layer of complexity is the rise of Black Aboriginal movements, which reject African heritage and promote a narrative that the first inhabitants of the Americas looked identical to Africans. These groups claim that an African-looking population were the first peoples of the Americas, ignoring scientific evidence that migration and adaptation over millennia led to distinct physical traits amongst indigenous populations. While migrations out of Africa did spread across the globe, the idea that the first peoples of the Americas were African-looking, it oversimplifies history, and it ignores the natural changes that occurred as populations adapted to their environments. This narrative erases the diversity of indigenous peoples and undermines legitimate research. Furthermore, the notion of a pure people is biologically and historically inaccurate. Humanity has always been a mixture, shaped by migration, adaptation, and interaction. Humanity, again, has always been a mixture, shaped by migration, adaptation, and interaction. The forgotten intercontinental slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade is well documented. It's a well-documented atrocity, but an equally significant chapter of history, the intercontinental slave trade of indigenous peoples, is often overlooked. This triangular slave trade existed, and communities can validate this. This trade took place between New England, the Carolinas, and Barbados under the government of the Lords Proprietors, who commissioned John Lawson to study us to better learn how to divide us against each other and divide up the land for the taking. What's also left out is the presence of Africans in the Americas before 1619, such as the 600 plus Maroon Africans absorbed into the Tuscarora tribe in northeastern North Carolina, or the Black conquistadors who left their mark on indigenous populations across the country. These overlooked histories reveal the blending of African and indigenous cultures, challenging simplistic narratives. Again, the call to action. To counteract these issues, we must commit to uncovering true sources, those validated by the communities they document. We must reject false narratives, challenge prejudices within our own communities, and embrace the interconnectedness of our shared histories. Only by coming together can we dismantle the systems of oppression that divide us and ensure that the quilt of history is stitched together with truth, respect, and unity. History is not just about the past, it is about the foundation of our collective future. If we fail to honor the truth, we risk losing our way entirely. A unified perspective on indigenous identity, oral histories, and the path forward, including the role of colonial records in validating indigenous histories, is a must. Aboriginals saying they got their historical truth from their grandmothers, or Plains natives saying this is not in their creation story, or our relatives to the south below the imaginary border just flat out denying and responding with hate, does no one any good. It only creates more confusion, miseducation, anarchy, and chaos, making all of us more divided than ever and less likely to become collectively secure in protecting Earth Mother and our future generations. Colonial records and congressional documents, state archives, and university records are essential tools for reconstructing and validating indigenous histories. These documents, though written through a colonial lens, provide crucial evidence for understanding the past. For example, Giovanni de Verrazano, his letter offers a description of the Cape Fear Indians, my family, who remain in New Hanover, Brunswick, Bladen, Horry, Columbus, Robeson, Pender, and Onslow counties, the futility of racial supremacy, and the Crayon box debate. It is disheartening to witness the persistence of racist narratives and infighting amongst various groups. People waste time arguing over labels like Native, Indigenous, Aboriginal, Afro-Indigenous, copper-colored, black and white, and on and on and on. These debates are trivial, akin to choosing a color from a crayon box. White supremacists, black supremacists, Afrocentrists, Pan-Africanists, and racially exclusionary Native Americans perpetuate the same toxic ideologies, each seeking to elevate their own identity above others. This environment of supremacy distracts us from critical issues: environmental sustainability, clean water, and the survival of future generations. The Peacemaker and other unifying leaders across nations spoke of unity, but their messages have been sidelined by division. The importance of self-identification and acceptance. People get unnecessarily upset about how others identify themselves, whether someone calls themselves Afro-Indigenous, Black Indian, or any other term. It reflects their personal identity and heritage. Personally, I don't identify as a color, nor do I subscribe to the term Afro. I am Oklahoman, and this is how I and my people identify ourselves. My bloodline and heritage are validated through ancestral records, oral traditions, and my connection to the land and grandparents from Indian Woods Reservation who served as Tuscarora chiefs, amongst other leaders. If my identity challenges your perception or makes you uncomfortable, then perhaps it's time to reflect on your own internal biases. My focus is not on appeasing others, but on fighting for clean water, protecting our lands, and working towards a sustainable Earth Mother. I can't say this enough. These are the battles that matter, not the petty arguments over racial terminology and superiority. Oral histories as valid evidence. In many academic circles, oral histories are dismissed as hearsay, particularly by European-influenced institutions. However, oral traditions are foundational to indigenous cultures worldwide. They hold the wisdom, experiences, and truths of our ancestors. Yet many scholars demand written sources and scoff at oral histories, revealing their colonized mindset. For instance, historians often use words like presumably or maybe to fill gaps in the written record. These same gaps could be bridged by listening to indigenous oral traditions, listening to the communities that you are writing about. As an example, African navigators such as Abu Bakari are dismissed because their voyages are not well documented in European sources. Yet, common sense tells us that if European explorers used ocean currents to reach the Americas, then experienced African navigators using these same currents with the same or superior navigational skills could have done so centuries earlier. The dangers of supremacy and division. Globally, supremacy, whether racial, political, or religious, has created chaos. Christians fight Muslims. Jews clash with Muslims, and Democrats vilify Republicans while Republicans reciprocate the sentiment, and countless groups battle over ideology. Even within indigenous spaces, we see divisions: red against black, black against red, all against white, and white against all. The very symbol of unity, the medicine wheel, representing the harmony of red, white, black, and yellow, stands in stark contrast to the hate many perpetuate. Supremacy is not intelligence. No intelligent species points weapons at itself or prioritizes division over cooperation. Let's pretend an alien or some alien invaders from outer space was to observe planet Earth. And one of the things they are looking at is our weaponry. They would probably be worried at first because they see so many weapons across the globe from many countries pointing up towards space. And they would probably assume, speaking about aliens, that these weapons were designed for them, to target them, since the weapons are pointed up. But further studying and research of the human species by the aliens, they will come to the understanding and conclusion that even though these weapons are pointed up, they are designed to come back down. So from an alien perspective about the human species, they would conclude that we are underdeveloped, barbaric, and savage, and not evolved enough because the intelligent species don't bomb themselves. The weapons that go up are designed to come right back down on our own planet. This is not a sign of intelligence, and on the contrary, it is downright disastrous, barbaric, and savage. We can actually wipe out our own species because of differences in politics and religion and the pursuit of power. If you were an alien in space looking down and studying the human species, what would you think? Humanity behaves like a virus, spreading destruction wherever it goes. Indigenous cultures, with their focus on sustainability, understood how to live in harmony with the earth. Modern science often dismisses these practices as primitive, further fueling the disconnection from nature and each other. Prophecies and the need for change. Indigenous prophecies from the Haudenosaunee, Hopi, Sioux nations, and African spiritual leaders like Credo Mutwa warn of dire consequences if humanity does not change its ways. We are rapidly approaching a breaking point. Earth Mother, like a human body fighting a virus, may raise her temperature to cleanse herself of humanity's destructive presence. The way forward, humanity must choose a different path, one of unity, respect, sustainability. We must learn from our mistakes and reject the divisive ideologies that have plagued us for centuries. Let us focus on what truly matters: clean water, sustainable lands, and a future for the next 7 generations. I've repeated this several times. Let us honor the wisdom of our ancestors, whether through oral histories, genetic ties, or spiritual teachings. Only through collective action and a return to indigenous principles of balance and harmony Can we hope to heal ourselves and heal Earth Mother? The choice is ours, and the time is to act now. Neil deGrasse Tyson believes that Christopher Columbus's arrival in America was the most significant event in human history. It was definitely one of the most horrible events, but here's the significance that he's talking about. Here's why. It reunited the branches of the human family. For 10,000 years, the human species was separated into two branches: those in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and those in North and South America. Columbus's voyage brought these two groups back together, leading to genetic mixing and cultural exchange. A necessary event, even if Columbus hadn't been the one to discover America, and I'm using that word discover just for the sake of conversation because we know he did not discover America. But even if it wasn't Columbus to have done that, someone else would have done it in his place. European exploration was inevitable, and it was only a matter of time before the two branches of humanity reunited. Impact on genetic makeup. The reunion of these two groups impacted the genetic makeup of the human species, leading to the diverse mix we see today. An archaeologist who recently participated in archaeological work in Mexico stated that the Olmecs developed a calendar that goes back to about 3,113 years before Christ. Studies done by researchers like Dr. Ivan van Sertima, Alexander von Wuthenau, and Runoko Rashidi have presented evidence linking the Olmecs to Africans in the western part of Africa. Dr. Clyde Winters' studies shows that the Olmec used the Mendi script, a writing system used amongst the Mandinka and other Africans in West Africa. The Olmecs practiced a religion and astronomical sciences identical to those practiced by Africans in Mali, the region, and Nigeria today. The Olmecs also had a religious practice of thunder worship, where the axe was a prominent feature, similar to the Shango or thunder god worshipped in West Africa. The elephant in the tablet. The artifact we're referring to about the elephant in the tablet, often called the Brazilian tablet or the Brazilian statuette, is a fascinating piece of evidence that may point to pre-Columbian transatlantic contact between the Mali Empire and the Americas. This 10-inch, 25.4 centimeter black basalt statuette depicts a figure holding an inscribed plaque across its chest, with additional inscriptions near its feet. The inscriptions are believed to be in the Vai script, associated with the Mandi people of West Africa, particularly from the region of present-day Mali. Mansa Musa, the emperor of the Mali Empire, which was larger than Western Europe, is known for his vast wealth and influence. It is recorded that his predecessor, Mansa Abu Bakari II, sent Mandinka explorers to the Americas long before Columbus. These explorers navigated the Atlantic, exploring several parts of North America, including extensive use of the Mississippi and other rivers. Inscriptions at Four Corners, Arizona suggest that these explorers not only reached the Americas but also brought elephants with them from Africa, a detail corroborated by depictions of elephants in pre-Columbian art. The Mali Empire was documented to have carried elephants on their ships, and the large number of depictions of elephants in pre-Columbian art strengthens the case for the presence in the Americas. These depictions, such as the elephant motifs on Moche pottery from South America and Mayan carvings, provide compelling evidence of African influence. This is not a question of lacking evidence, but rather a challenge to overcome the dishonest archaeological practices that emerged during the 18th and 19th century. It is our responsibility to address these omissions and distortions to provide an accurate understanding of history. for future generations. There are dishonest archaeologists and anthropologists. One I'll name right now, Robert Sefford. This is an archaeologist, anthropologist with a Eurocentric view of the world. And that's how he reports things. That's how he writes things. That's how he recreates things in their image.
Foreign, foreign, beautiful rain. Don't disturb me, beautiful rain. Oh,
2002, I had one of the best experiences of my entire life. I had the opportunity to travel with elders from Hawaii and other places to Bali and Johannesburg, South Africa. And as we took our journey together, we not only journeyed through places and cultures, but we also journeyed through time. And as a result of that, we remembered something. The story that we remembered is the story of the Necklace of Mysteries. And the way I found out about this Necklace of Mysteries wasn't in one moment with the telling of a story. First came experiences that didn't quite make sense, but were very touching when they happened. When we were in Bali, there were several of us there in the delegation, including the two Hawaiian elders, Mr. Makua and Auntie Poi Poi. Mr. Makua would pray the sun up. A man would come by with a net bag full of shells, and every day he would motion that these shells were available for sale. And just before we left, Mr. Makua motioned for the man to come up. And the two of them talked with each other, and then they negotiated the sale of two of these beautiful shells, which are in a spiral. I knew that Mr. Makua really appreciated what it took to dive so deep to get the kind of shells that this man was bringing.
By the boat diving, I'm tired for diving, yeah.
For dive?
For dive. Not here.
Yeah, because this is deep water stuff.
Yeah.
But there seemed like there was something more. The next morning, Mr. Makua saw that man again, and he told him that he would be leaving. And there was a great deal of emotion between the two men. Mr. Makua said, when we got back home to Hawaii, he told me on the phone that somehow they had achieved some kind of understanding.
Then I'd like you make offering for me.
Okay.
Your family temple. Your temple.
I thought about that shell man. I thought, I wonder what the meaning of it was. So some months later, we got to South Africa. And when we were there, we had the chance to meet with a Zulu elder named Crayon. The conversation went the way most traditional conversations go. Crayon began to tell traditional stories from his history and from his culture, and that was by way of introducing us to Zulu culture, but also a way of finding out how we're related to each other.
yes. You went far away in the world with this great warrior man. They call it Mau.
Maui.
Yes, Maui. He was a great chief.
Yes.
And he went across the sea and he never came back.
Well, there was a kind of a hush in the room because, of course, some of us come from the island of Maui, and Maui is a traditional spiritual figure that figures centrally in Hawaiian culture. And we wondered how this man in South Africa could know about Maui.
Maui, the great god man, he left Libya and he went across the world, a brave warrior, and he fished many countries, many islands. He brought them out of the sea. He was a real man, not a story. He was there because we also in South Africa, we the black people, we know Maui or Mawela, the one who crosses the ocean. He was a real man. He went away to the land of the sunrise and never came back.
From that conversation and how that brought us back into the ancient connections between Hawaiian people and African people, Crayon Mutwa produced this incredible necklace, which must have weighed close to 20 pounds. And it had really strange, interesting beads, and the beads were rocks the size of a man's fist, a fistful of rock. And he asked, did anyone at the table know what this meant? Could anyone decipher the information that was encoded on the rocks? So I tried to make myself humble. I knew I didn't know what was on those rocks. And the necklace passed from person to person. And then just before it got to Auntie Poi Poi, I saw her hands start to tremble like this, both of them. And I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be good. Whatever's going to be happening, I really want to hear.
Ay tapito, ay tapoto, ay kara. In other words, I said the heart. It is the pico or the center of the universe of the woman.
Yes, ma'am.
This is the top of the head of all things that is to come. The leaf of life will bring forth many in different stages. And then the sun will shine. The sun that had taken Africa's people away, the boat, like cattle, slaved. The fruit of the land has been barren. And then the coming back of the children. Again the sea shall arrive, and the fishes shall be like the silver fishes of knowledge, shall come back, and no war shall ever be again. This is what the sundial is telling.
Yes, ma'am.
It will open up the whole world. The center of the eye says that within the 2012, the year of the opening. Let me grab that. 2, 3.
This is a lady from New Zealand who's reading this. And she's reading it exactly as Aunt Maya.
And the tribes will again dwell. And the main 2 important tribes that belong to this land will again survive in the ancestral lands again.
Crayon Mutwa told Auntie that many wise men in his tribe had tried to learn from him how to read this necklace of mysteries, but they weren't able to.
I wish all of you, really wish that there had been other Sangomas besides Virginia who hear this. Here is a woman from New Zealand, from Hawaii, who has never seen this thing, but she is reading it, and I swear before God, exactly as I was taught.
Part of the conversation that came out of that revelation of Auntie Poi Poi's had to do with wave walkers. So when I got home, I thought again about how important it is to bring Indigenous elders together. And then I also thought, really with some despair, how terrible it is that this knowledge is dying and not getting passed on. So while this was going over in my mind, to comfort myself, I recalled to mind something else that happened to me in South Africa. So after I talked to Crayon Mutwa, I called Auntie Poi Poi up, and I asked her, I was telling her about what he had said about the star people, and she nodded and she said yes. And then I told her about, he said that the descendants were beachcombers. We would call them beachcombers today. And she said, no, not beachcombers, wave walkers. And what amazed me when she identified those first people as wave walkers is that, how did she know that? And what is it that the two of those elders know? And I can't say really anything more because I don't understand more of it than that. But I know it's something really wonderful and really sacred.
Do you have anything in this book about the Olmecs?
No, not really. I mentioned them briefly. I explored the Olmec mystery in considerable depth.
Could you explain that to people that maybe
in Fingerprints of the Gods? Yes. So it's considered to be the earliest high culture of Central America. Everybody's heard about the Aztecs. Everybody's heard about the Maya. But before the Aztecs and before the Maya, there were a culture who are referred to as the Olmecs. Again, we don't know what they called themselves. That's what the Aztecs called them. They called them the Olmecs, and it means the rubber people because that a rubber-producing area of Mexico. They worked in giant megalithic constructions. What they're most famous for is these huge carved human heads, which can be on a scale of up to 20 to 25 tons in weight, and which have curious features which have been interpreted variously as Polynesian, African, don't look like classic Native American features.
Keep that up.
But one of the things I've realized is that there is no classic Native American feature. That Native Americans are have a very complex genetic story with very many different elements brought into it, and we shouldn't be necessarily surprised by the supposedly non-Native American look of these Olmec heads.
What do we think those helmets were that they were wearing?
Nobody knows, because no physical example of such a helmet has ever been found, just like no physical example of an Egyptian pharaoh's crown has ever been found. All we see is the stone.
The Olmecs, you were talking about the genetics of these people that live in Native Americans, that they vary widely, but the Olmecs seem to have very similar features, the thick lips, the wide noses. Why do we think that is?
Well, this is part of a curious mystery that is not unconnected to the genetic mystery. It's been known by archaeologists for quite a long time that there are anomalous skulls in parts of Brazil, which appear to show very strongly Polynesian or African features, very much like the features that we see on the Olmec heads. And a number of archaeologists who got into trouble with their colleagues for this have used that to argue many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, that the settlement story of the Americas is much more complicated than we've realized. And what the DNA is doing is it's telling us that there was something really weird happened with settlement. You see, what happened with those African or Polynesian-looking skulls was that they were tested for DNA when DNA technology was not as advanced as it is today. And what that DNA showed was that they were more closely related to modern Native Americans than they are to any other people in the world. So the notion that there was some connection with Polynesia or Africa was dismissed. But now that we have very firm evidence of an Australasian genetic signal, Australian Aborigines, Papua New Guinea, Melanesians, with those kind of features, now that we have the genetic evidence that is found in the Amazon, we have to go back to that old evidence and reconsider it.
Wow. Yeah, I would love to find out what that is. They've always fascinated me. The Olmecs, it's always been such a strange image, the large heads with the helmets on them, and how do they universally look like that? I mean, all
of the features are very, very similar.
Wow.
They're very, very, very similar.
And always with the helmets.
And almost always. I won't claim that every single Olmec head has a helmet of it, because I think I've seen one that didn't. It's quite a while ago since I explored the Olmec area. But what's fascinating about them is they are supposedly the first high civilization of Central America, that they create structures on a massive scale, that you can see connections between them and the later Maya. That whole mystery of the Mayan calendar was clearly inherited from the Olmecs. It wasn't something the Maya made up. The Olmecs used that same symbolism. So the Mayan calendar is actually an Olmec calendar. And if we then consider the possibility that the Olmecs may just be the latest, the earliest surviving manifestation of that calendar, it could go back much further than that.
I can bring you a guest that is like the world #1 leader in renowned of the Aztec calendar. You know what I'm saying? Like I can bring you that dude if you want to sit down with him. He can break all that down for you.
He's going to talk for a couple of minutes tonight?
No, I'm not gonna be able to get him on tonight, but
okay.
I can set you up with him to have a whole show with him. He's somebody you want to speak, have a whole show with him.
I'll call you tomorrow. We'll talk. But go ahead.
Yeah. So, so what we're talking about? We're talking about anthropomorphism, right?
Yeah. So
let's take Michael Jordan, because I'm gonna show you how all this exists right now. And when we say Olmec is the founders of civilization, there's certain things that make civilization. It's not just people. It's concepts being accepted on a wide level. It's organization. It's religion. It's all these things layered on the top of a bunch of people that make a cohesive civilization, right? So the Olmecs were the first in the Americas. And they did that with no influence from anyone but the sun, moon, and stars, just like everyone else on the planet. That's why we have similar arrangements in our holy places, because they're all patterned after the same stars. So don't nobody got to get on a boat and go show nobody how to build a village that's patterned after the stars. Remember, back then, our ancestors didn't have TV. They didn't have all these comic books. They didn't have nothing. The stars that they watched and influenced them was not on TV. They was in the star. They was in the heavens. See what I'm saying? That was the Hollywood. It was up there. And we all watched the same shows like we all watch the same shows now. Whew. Right? That's where astrology come from. So Michael Jordan, they compared him to a black panther, a black cat. Why? Because the way he moved, because he was ferocious on the court, right? That's you know what I mean? That's the same concept. So I want to show you how in today's concept, we have something that is world known, like it's accepted around the world. It's like an unspoken anthropomorphic symbol, right? So if I was sitting here with a shirt on and it had a person on it and they had wings and a halo, what would that say to you?
I would think of an angel.
But what would that say to you about the person on the shirt?
Oh, he's a good person.
What else would it say to you? What message would it be conveying to you? If I was sitting here with a picture of my mother with wings and a halo.
That you love her.
What else?
I don't know where you're going with this, because I understand like 4 things.
Okay, so what happens when somebody in the hood die? Spray paint they on a hoodie.
Oh, okay.
See,
right.
It's a universal symbol that somebody is transitioned into the next world.
Right.
That's what angels, if you see angels on someone, a halo, that regardless of what language you speak, right? Regardless of your income level, your nationality, it's a common accepted expression, right? Of somebody who's transitioning. Right? So that's commonly known amongst our civilization. We all know that. If somebody in 2,000 years came and discovered our civilization and saw statues with men with wings, what would they think?
They died.
But if they don't have any cultural context and they were looking at the statues in a literal form, and they see a man with wings, what would they think?
Right, that they actually had wings.
That they actually had wings.
Right.
So just imagine this. We have a tale about a man named Michael Jordan who was known as a black cat who could fly. Right. Now just think, 2,000 years, somebody puts a book about Michael Jordan and they're like, this nigga was a black cat and he could fly, Air Jordan.
Right.
They not gonna know what to think. Right. And then they're gonna say, and who was this Kobe Bryant nigga? He was just like him. It was like a reincarnation. Right? Like he was channeling Michael Jordan. Remember, we heard that, right? Kobe was channeling Mike.
Yeah.
That's shamanism. That's anthropomorphizing something. At this point, Michael is the god. And he's being channeled through Kobe. You understand what I'm saying? I'm showing, this is all metaphysics, and it's right here with us now. right? Kobe was known as the Black Mamba.
Yes.
Kobe died. Now he has wings. So now we're talking about a black mamba that got wings, a snake that got wings, right? Somebody who don't know no better might go, damn, I think Kobe was Quetzalcoatl. He was the feathered serpent. You understand what I'm saying? If you don't have cultural context, how do you put these things into proper perspective? So I say all that to say that when people look at the Olmec colossal heads, they're doing the same thing. They're looking at it in a literal way, right? To suggest that somebody went 200 miles up into a mountain to go grab a rock to make a photograph. You understand? No, these are metaphysical expressions that express the culture. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you're going to just see Negro heads. But if you understand what you're looking at, a cultural expression that lays everything out. And I just showed you how it's still with us. Right? So let's get into, we're going to get into the Olmec, what we would call the cultural experience. So we know they found, well, let me just show you this. This is a book. This is the book I'm going to be reading from. All right.
Let me put it on the screen. The Olmec World.
The Olmec World, Ritual and Rulership. Right. So in this book, see, we know about the 17 heads, right? But do we know about the thousands and thousands of anatomically correct Olmec artifacts that show what these people actually look like? How many people know about the mask? They know about the colossal heads, and those colossal heads represent chiefs who passed away, and those chiefs were transitioning into the afterworld. They were going through a transformation, and that's what I'm going to explain to you tonight, so people can understand what they're looking at. All right, what they're looking at is shamanism, and they're looking at I always be messing that with anthropomorphism. All right, so I'm
engaged in trade with distant regions, acquiring vex for which they are known. This trade network not only brought wealth to the Olmec cities but also facilitated cultural exchange, spreading Olmec influence throughout Mesoamerica. Tres Zapotes, another significant Olmec center, rose to prominence after the decline of La Venta around 400 BCE. While not as elaborately constructed as its predecessors, Tres Zapotes played an important role in the later phases of Olmec civilization. It is particularly noted for the discovery of the earliest known long count calendar date, inscribed on Stela C, which marks a significant development in Mesoamerican timekeeping. The long count calendar would later be adopted and refined by the Maya and other Mesoamerican cultures, highlighting the Olmec's contributions to the intellectual and scientific advancements of the region. The development of these urban centers represents a key aspect of Olmec civilization, illustrating their ability to organize large populations, engage in monumental construction, and maintain complex social and political systems. The rise and fall of San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes reflect the dynamic nature of Olmec society and its adaptability to changing environmental and social conditions. These urban centers were not only the physical manifestations of Olmec power but also the cultural and religious heartlands of a civilization that would leave a lasting legacy on Mesoamerican history. Part 3: Religion and Cosmology. Religion was the cornerstone of Olmec civilization, deeply intertwined with every aspect of their society. The Olmecs practiced a complex and sophisticated religion that not only shaped their daily lives but also influenced their art, architecture, and political structure. Understanding the religious beliefs and cosmology of the Olmec people provides crucial insights into their worldview and the motivations behind many of their most significant cultural achievements. At the heart of Olmec religion was a belief in a three-tiered universe, consisting of the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. This cosmological view was shared by many later Mesoamerican cultures, suggesting that the Olmecs laid the foundations for a religious framework that would endure for centuries. The heavens were associated with the gods, celestial bodies, and the forces of nature, while the earth was seen as the realm of humans and other living beings. The underworld, on the other hand, was a place of darkness, death, and mystery, inhabited by spirits and deities associated with fertility, agriculture, and the cycles of life and death. The Olmecs believed that their rulers were intermediaries between these three realms, possessing the ability to society. This belief in the divine right of rulers is reflected in the colossal stone heads and other monumental art that depict Olmec leaders as godlike figures. The rulers were responsible for performing religious rituals, including offerings and sacrifices, to appease the gods and maintain cosmic balance. These rituals were often conducted at ceremonial centers, such as those found at San Lorenzo and La Venta, where large altars and platforms were constructed for the purpose. One of the most distinctive aspects of Olmec religion was the practice of shamanism. Shamans, who were likely members of the elite class, were believed to possess the ability to transform into animals, particularly the jaguar, which was a central figure in Olmec mythology. The jaguar was associated with power, fertility, and the underworld, and it was believed that shamans could enter a trance-like state, allowing their spirit to merge with the jaguar and journey to the other realms. This shamanic transformation is a recurring theme in Olmec art, with numerous depictions of human jaguar hybrids, known as W.A.R jaguars, symbolizing the mystical connection between humans and the supernatural.
Dr. Clyde Winters. Dr. Clyde Winters has studied the inscriptions on the Brazilian statuette, proposing that they described the burial of a Mandi elite named in a hemispherical tomb near a cave. This aligns with traditional Mandi burial customs. You can't put that on a rug. It aligns with it, combined with the possibility of African elephants and explorers reaching the Americas. The statuette and its inscriptions fuel discussions about the far-reaching influence of the Mali Empire. While mainstream academic consensus has yet to fully embrace these findings, the evidence is undeniable and calls for further research into the possibility of pre-Columbian contact between Africa and the Americas. Again, evidence upon evidence upon evidence. Now, how about the Four Corners and the Anasazi? We're just discussing the connection between the table inscription attributed to the Mandinka explorers and the Four Corners region. It is indeed compelling, particularly given the historical and cultural significance of the area. The Four Corners region, where the modern states Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico converge, was home to the ancestral Puebloans, commonly referred to as the Anasazi. This ancient civilization is renowned for its complex architecture, including cliff dwellings, ceremonial kivas, as well as its sophisticated understanding of astronomy and agriculture, their cosmology. If the Mandinka explorers, as sent by the Mali Empire under Mansa Abu Bakari II, reached the Americas, this region, it would not only suggest remarkable transatlantic navigational skills, but also an extraordinary journey inland from the Gulf of Mexico. The Mississippi River and its tributaries, along with other waterways, could have provided a navigable route. This aligns with oral traditions and inscriptions, suggesting that Mandinka explorers traveled extensively in North America, bringing elements of their culture and possibly even elephants, as previously mentioned. The Four Corners regions of rock art and petroglyphs are of particular interest. Some researchers have noticed and noted similarities between certain symbols in West African scripts, including the Vai and the Mandi writing systems. Additionally, the depiction of elephants and other African motifs in that area may support the theory of African influence. This is potential connections between the Anasazi and the Mandinka, which raises intriguing questions about cultural exchange, trade, and shared knowledge systems. We're talking about scripts, we're talking about elephants and other things. The Anasazi sudden disappearance around 1300 CE has also fueled speculation. Could contact with foreign explorers have influenced their migration patterns or cultural evolution? While this remains speculative, the possibility of cross-cultural interaction between the Mandinka explorers and the Anasazi is worth exploring further. It emphasizes the need for interdisciplinary research combining archaeology, linguistics, and indigenous oral histories to uncover the full spectrum of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact. So the eastward migration, there's evidence suggesting that some of the ancestral Puebloans, commonly referred to as the Anasazi, may have migrated to other regions, including parts of the southeast United States, following abandonment of their settlements in the Four Corners region around 1300 CE. This migration aligns with theories about environmental stress, prolonged droughts, and socio-political factors, keyword, that led to their departure from areas such as Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. Social political factors, that's talking about warring, battling, unrest. Possible connections to the southeast. Here's number one. Cultural similarities. There are striking parallels between the architecture, ceramics, and cultural practices of the ancestral Puebloans and southeastern indigenous groups. For example, the use of kiva-like ceremonial structures and specific pottery styles have been found in areas linked to the Mississippian culture, particularly at sites such as Cahokia in modern-day Illinois. Number two, oral traditions. Several American Indian groups in the Southeast, such as the Creek, Choctaw, Cherokee, and let's not leave out the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois Confederacy, have oral traditions that speak of migrations from the West or the Southwest. These traditions could hint at ancestral ties to the ancestral Puebloans or other groups from the Four Corners region. Number three, trade networks. The extensive trade networks of the pre-Columbian Americas would have facilitated contact and movement between regions. Artifacts from the Four Corners region, such as turquoise, have been found in southeastern archaeological sites, suggesting ongoing interaction or migration. Number four, linguistic evidence. Some linguists have proposed links between Uto-Aztec languages of the Southwest and Muskogean languages of the Southeast, which could indicate migration or long-standing cultural connections. Number five, Mississippian influence. The southeastern United States was home to the Mississippian culture, known for its large mound-building societies. Some researchers theorize that the Anasazi or their descendants could have contributed to knowledge, practices, or cultural elements to these complex societies. For instance, certain southeastern mound structures resemble terraced architecture seen in ancestral Puebloan sites. Now, here in North Carolina, There's mounds here. More to that story in a different video. Migrations. Let's talk about migration theories. While there is no definitive proof of large-scale migrations from the Four Corners to the southeast, the evidence suggests that at least some ancestral Puebloans may have joined other native communities or integrated into pre-existing cultures in the southeast. Their movement would have been influenced by environmental factors. Again, here we go, social pressures, and the search for more stable resources. We hear some of the other tribes, like the Navajo, speak about warring with the Anasazi. Here we're talking about social pressures. This theory also aligns with broader migration patterns observed throughout pre-Columbian North America, where groups often moved or merged due to changing environmental or social conditions. Further archaeological, genetic, and linguistic research could help clarify the extent of this migration and its impact on southeastern indigenous cultures. Okay, so I share different perspectives. I've spoken from the perspective of the Mesoamerican, the Mayan Olmec. I spoke also about Abu Bakari and the oral history and the evidence surrounding him. And what I'm suggesting is maybe we should read between the lines instead of one looking at the other and the other looking at the one and both arguing about who was first. Maybe the answer lies somewhere in the middle. I'm gonna leave you with a series of questions at the very end. We covered a whole lot in here, and I gave no definitive answers on any of it because it is open for discussion. But what you can't make go away is the evidence that was presented. So what do you do with that? All right, let's go into the questions. So from the definitions, you heard me defining earlier when we first started this conversation presentation, from narcissism to Eurocentrics, Afrocentrics, to the Hebrews, Moors, more splinter groups, and on and on. Outside of those religious organizations or cultural organizations, when we're talking about behaviors such as Eurocentrism, oikophobia, and all those type things, you probably noticed we all carry pieces of these definitions we inherit from the world around us, whether we acknowledge them or not. It's hard growing up in a society that's race conscious or color conscious. Everything is about race and color, colorism and racism. These pieces are shaped by the society we're born into, an environment controlled by an imperialist industrial prison complex. This system has convinced itself that it holds the moral high ground, giving it the self-appointed right to dictate the rules and police the world. The influence of this complex extends far beyond the borders, reaching into the hearts and minds of people everywhere. So it's no surprise that many of us carry remnants of narcissism, egotism, and other isms, traces of a system that seeks to control, dominate, fragment. But here's the key. It's not the thoughts that define us, but it's the actions we choose to take in response to these thoughts. It's easy to be bombarded by negative or destructive thoughts throughout the day, but it's what we do with them, whether we let them define us or choose to transcend them, that truly matters. And with that in mind, I want to leave you with a series of questions. These questions are not meant to provide answers, but to challenge the assumptions and the preconceived ideas we've been taught. It's helping you challenge yourself, challenge colonization. Here's a question. Did Africans arrive in America long before Columbus? Or were the Vikings and the Asians the only ones to set foot on this land first? If you believe Africans were excluded from this history, then why is that so difficult to imagine? That Africans who had advanced seafaring capabilities and an intimate knowledge of ocean currents hundreds of years before Columbus, why is it so hard to believe that he could have made the same journey that they've made? Are only Europeans capable of traveling these same currents and making it from point A to B? The same currents, the same direction. As a matter of fact, he learned from them and had a Moorish crew member who was familiar with these currents because he came from a culture that knew about these hundreds of years before Columbus. So is it so hard to imagine that? If you can't wrap your brain around this, you have to ask your question. You have to ask the question why. Next, are you influenced by centrism in your thinking? Eurocentrism? By the belief that your cultural narrative is the only valid one? Why do we dismiss the body of evidence that exists outside of European sources? Does the absence of European documentation invalidate everything else? Do we need their stamp of approval for something to be valid? Is it only valid if it comes from them? If so, does this mean that only European accounts of history are worthy of consideration, while all other cultures' histories are relegated to the periphery? If we do discard the non-European evidence, then where does that leave us? How are we to ignore entire civilizations and cultures simply because their truths don't fit into the framework built by imperialist eyes? Let's think about the Olmecs. For example, an ancient civilization of Mesoamerica. Local historians and elders speak of the colossal heads, the monumental stone figures that seem to represent shamanic transformations, where humans are said to metamorphosize into animals in a sacred spiritual process. This is a form of truth, a direct source from the people who lived it. By definition, these stories are true sources, grounded in the experiences of those who lived them. But in the context of this broader discussion, we cannot ignore the possibility of African influence on these ancient cultures. How do we reconcile the two? African presence in the Americas and the shamanic transformations seen in Mesoamerica traditions. What if these seemingly separate histories are not disconnected, but were part of a larger, more complex cultural exchange? Cultural mixing has been a natural phenomenon throughout history from the beginning of time. People move, they trade, and share ideas. And as they do, cultures merge, influencing one another and evolving. So could it be that the historical narratives of the Maya and the evidence of Africans in pre-Columbian America are not competing stories, but are instead evidence of cultural blending? What if the truth lies somewhere in between, in this intersection of these two histories? And here's another question. If we focus solely on our own culture as the defining narrative, whether African, Mayan, or any other culture, are we missing the point? Could this exclusive focus be where we make our greatest mistake? What if the story is not one of isolation, but of blending? As we have demonstrated, cultures have blended from the beginning of migrations, making it impossible to have a pure people. There's no pure people. Everybody is blended. So what if this is not a story of isolation, but of blending, of the coming together of nations? Because everywhere these migrating people went, they left a footprint. Mixing and adaptation has taken place everywhere. And over a millennia, what has started out looking one way will change into something completely different over a millennia. Could it be that our insistence on separating cultures instead of acknowledging their intersections is preventing us from seeing the full picture of human history? How about the Bantu DNA found around the globe, including Polynesia, which is on the opposite side of the world, or Credo Mutwa, who's a Zulu elder, medicine man, and Auntie Po, who's Hawaiian, a Hawaiian seer, belonging to cultures on opposite sides of the world, but their cultures intersected according to Hawaiian and Zulu oral history, with an artifact. This is evidence of the numerous things found in the Caribbean. What about the artifacts of the numerous things found in the Caribbean? The artifact that Credo Mutwa Auntie Po discussed, the necklace, the Maui necklace. I could go on, but the question still remains, how do you explain all of these things away? Seems like the easiest thing to do is sweep it under a rug and have archaeologists discredit or dishonest and racist anthropologists like Robert Seffer, who tried to debunk migrations from Africa and how some humans are more intelligent with higher IQs, alluding to the white supremacist ideology of white people being superior. This is an anthropologist, Robert Seffer. Do you think he's the only one? There's many people of European descent in the scientific fields of archaeology, anthropology, and the other sciences that studies human behavior, migrations, so forth. Do you think they're not going to try and find a way to put themselves at the top? Do you think people who colonize other people are not going to rewrite history in their image and do whatever it takes to maintain that position and that status at the top of the ladder? Have we forgotten how Eurocentric views have rewritten history right under our own noses? Were we actually savages while the settlers were godly people trying to save our souls? Or were they actually terrorists? That we were fighting for our lives, the lives of our families, and our land, and our water, and everything that we hold dear and near. But if you watch Western TV shows, the natives are always the bad guys, bloodthirsty and ready to take a white woman to do unthinkable things to her. And let's not forget about the many depictions of enslaved African Americans, or even during Jim Crow, the cartoon figures printed on papers looking like beasts, with an African American drooling at the mouth with red and eyes, red lips, ready to attack the innocent white woman. Do you think this is still not being done? Do you think that? It's being done, but more subtly with more advanced technology. And here's the big one, through media. There's one word to describe this: propaganda. Media is one of their greatest weapons, because if the news says it, then it must be true. The easiest way to assassinate one's character is through the media. And before a trial can happen, people are usually seen as guilty because people have already made their minds up in the public based off of the picture that the media paints. The media is a weapon of mass destruction. As soon as everyone realizes that history has been rewritten to serve the world power brokers or the bankers, then we can probably take a step forward. The media told us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. You know what? That turned out to be a lie. But what was present in Iraq was Zapata Oil Company. It's more plausible to think that Bush was protecting his family's oil investment. The Persian Gulf War, dubbed Operation Desert Storm of Zapata Petroleum Corp. How many of you learned about that in school? I didn't. It wasn't even in the curriculum. In 1959, Bush bought control of Zapata Offshore, funded with $800,000, splitting Zapata Corporation into two independent companies, Zapata Offshore, headed by Bush, who moved his office from Midland to Houston. Will and Hugh Lidke, the Pennzoil Barons, who co-founded Zapata Oil with their partner George Bush. How many soldiers died for the senseless war, thinking they were removing a dictator with weapons of mass destruction, when in actuality, Bush was protecting his investment? And we have the media and the automatons to thank for this. Do you realize how many lies we are fed through news and media, our politicians and institutions of higher learning? Yeah, miseducation in college, starting from grade school on up. Didn't they torture and brainwash many indigenous children in boarding schools? During integration, taught a one-sided story about history and government economics. But one thing everyone was taught was to be a good, obeying, tax-paying citizen. I'm not offering definitive answers here. I'm leaving you with these open-ended questions because it's through healthy engagement in dialogue, through challenging our assumptions, preconceived ideas, what we've been taught, and exploring the complexity of our shared past that we progress. Through open, honest discourse, we can evolve and move forward together collectively as a people and humanity as a whole. If we don't do this, then what our elders spoke about in the prophecies is what we have to look forward to. The choice is ours. The choice is yours.